The revolution is real, it's live, and as some comrades say, it's lit, right? lit, lit, lit. Real, live, lit, 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 right? The revolution is lit.
Uhuru comrades, and welcome to today's Omali Taught Me Sunday Study, live with the leader of the African nation, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. My name is Akile Anai, the Director of Agitation and Propaganda for the African People's Socialist Party, as well as your MC for this morning. Today's study is themed World Update, What's Happening in the Sahel? The Sahel is a region in Africa stretching from the Atlantic Ocean to Senegal, Mauritania, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Nigeria, Chad, and Sudan. Before the most recent Israeli bombardment of Palestine, anti-colonial struggles were exploding in places like Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. We saw a summer filled with uprisings against colonialism, especially the French, who have controlled the economies of approximately 14 African so-called countries. These struggles rage on as African people on the continent and dispersed throughout the world continue to fight for national liberation. We take a look at Africa today, the starting point of the violently imposed colonial mode of production by Europe on the rest of the world, to further understand the anti-colonial struggles we see being waged across the globe. It's important that we do this so that we don't make the mistake of assuming that what's happening in places like the Sahel and Palestine are recent or separate events brought about by bad colonial policy. The fact is, each of these struggles are inextricably linked to the other. Despite the best efforts of the colonizer, including the colonizer white left, who work to obscure Palestine's relationship to the struggle of all colonized people to be free, we will continue to make clear that our victory is tied to the liberation of all colonized people and the destruction of the colonial mode of production once and for all. Joining us today is Luwezi Kinshasa, Secretary General of the African Socialist International, or the ASI. The ASI was founded by Chairman Omali Yeshitela based on the recognition that African people represent a forcibly dispersed, colonized nation where we must unite under the leadership of the African working class for national liberation and socialism. Secretary General Luwezi is based in London, but was born in Congo. We will hear from Secretary General Luwezi about the situation in the Sahel, then we'll turn it over to the leader of the African nation and worldwide African revolution, Chairman Omali Yeshitela, to deepen this discussion further. Following these main presentations, we'll look at our announcements before going into questions and answers from our live audience. And before we start, if you believe in the right to anti-colonial free speech, if you believe that you should have the right to define your own interests, to express solidarity with anti-colonial struggle, or to hear an anti-colonial analysis that offers an alternative to the bourgeois colonial narrative, then let's take action together against the forces working to prevent anti-colonial free speech. I'm talking about Mark Zuckerberg, these state-controlled social media platforms which make the same kind of assault on free speech by preventing people from being able to access this discussion. We can fight back right now by taking a moment to like and share this video. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, tag your comrades, your friends, your family. Make sure that they cannot succeed in shadow banning this study. Hashtag shared, liked, and reposted in the comments and let us know where you are tuning in from. Thank you for your participation and pushing back against censorship, fighting for the rights of anti-colonial free speech. Now let's welcome on our first guest, Comrade Secretary General Luwezi Kinshasa. Uhuru SG.
Uhuru Director Kire, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this program. Omali Touch Me. It's really a privilege just to be part of this program. So thank you for that. Uhuru Chairman, I want to salute you for this incredible, relentless leadership on the front of ideas. Today, the African working class, the African nation in general, can be part of war of ideas, but leading it, just being in the forefront, the vanguard of it, the front line of ideas. I want to salute you for that. I also salute everybody who was joining. I was listening, so I'll ask everyone to share at least 50 times. You know, counting begins at 50. Share at least 50 times. And I think we can all do it. Do it for Palestine, do it for all colonized people are fighting back because we need to win the war ideas. What's going on in the Sahel? We are African internationalists, we are materialists. We will not say we started looking at this conflict, or the conflict in the Sahel just started this year or last year, or when the French ambassador was expelled, or when the Africans are waving Russian flags. No, it didn't start last month or yesterday or last year. You're looking at 600 years of struggles, of resistance by African people against colonizers, against invaders, and France is one of them. And particularly for younger people, this could be true for everybody. Colonization didn't start in 1885. When we say we're fighting against colonialism, we're fighting against colonial model production, it did not start in 1885. France became a major colonizer around 1600s. So that's a long time ago. It was preceded by that, by Portugal, Spain, but definitely France by 1600 became a major colonizer. And they invented this word, négrier. You know, the British and the others, they say slave ships. The French don't say that. The French say négrier to mean slave ship. So, and I like to characterize France and the others, négrier states, négrier nations, because they could not become what they are today without having those négriers. You know? And in France, they have even their language. Whoever does your work, when you write a book, people may say, who is your nègre? Basically, who is the person who did your work? And nègre to mean Africans. And that's, you know, that's everyday French language. You know, who did your work? You know, who is your nègre? And this is profound. So we cannot basically look at what's going on in West Africa without looking at what is France? You know, what France has done against Africa, what France has done against Black people in the last 600 years. Everyone loves, well, say everyone, France is supposed to be known or famous for his loving city of Paris. And Paris, as you know, one of the most iconic places in Paris is Eiffel Tower, which was built with blood and sweat of African people from Haiti. And you cannot forget that. And this is a part of the struggle today in Mali and Burkina Faso throughout the Sahel. Not just Paris, Nantes, Bordeaux, you know, people love wine, French wine, Le Havre, all these cities could not become what they are today without France having their négriers, without France being a colonizing nation. It's just impossible. And everybody, as you know, France like to brag about being the country that launched what they call today universal human rights. that was not possible without the rise of the bourgeoisie to power. And as you know, the bourgeoisie could not become a ruling class in Europe, in the US, throughout the world without the colonial mode of production. It's just impossible. And France produced, the French Revolution, and that's a triumph, a victory of a consolidation of power of the bourgeoisie, and which is impossible to say without the colonial mode of production. France like to brag about being a democratic country. All this is impossible without the attack and oppression of Africa and African nation, African people, basically everywhere. And you cannot talk of France without talking of the assassination of Thomas Sankara, because we're looking at the West Africa and the Sahel region, which France orchestrated under the leadership of François Mitterrand and Jacques Chirac, which was basically a coalition government between the left and the right, assassinating Thomas Sankara. And you cannot talk about France without talking about the CFA currency, the colonial currency that France imposed on us, on a 14 countries plus Comoros Island, that makes it 15 countries, just to live off Africa, to live off our people, is just in the most despicable way. Not just loot our gold, our diamond, but also control the banks, the currencies. All trade transactions have to be done under the supervision of France, and France gets paid every time Africa sells anything. And that's, is really critical for anyone who wants to understand why Africans are saying France out of Africa. You can't separate that. I just want to make sure people don't think that things started when Africans started saying France get out of Africa. No, it started much earlier than that. And what we're looking at is basically an accumulation, a concentration of all these contradiction expressing itself in a way we begin to see. And also, we need to expose France for their participation in overthrowing an assassination of Gaddafi's government and Gaddafi himself and some members of his family. There is a direct connection between overthrowing the government of Gaddafi and also the spread of what the colonizers refer to as jihadist attacks throughout West Africa. You can't separate the two. They are one and the same. They are to overthrow Gaddafi, and the assault on Mali, the assault on Niger, the assault on Burkina Faso. They are part of the same process to consolidate, to make sure colonialism stays in Africa, which means basically France and other colonizing nations continue to live off African resources, of Africans' labor, of African sweat, without Africans, people ourselves, being able to see the future. That's why France is in Mali today. That's why France, well, when I say it's in Mali, that's why France has been fighting basically to stay in West Africa. And so just after the overthrow of Gaddafi, as I said, we had this spread of jihadists in Mali in particular, where France and its allies armed what they refer to as separatist Tuaregs, basically to justify why France should send troops. For example, in Mali, the president of Mali at the time, Ibrahim Babacar Keïta, signed a deal calling France to come and rescue the government of Mali, the people of Mali, from the Tuareg separatists who were funded, who were armed by France and France allies. When I say France allies, you're talking about the US, you're talking about the rest of the EU, you're talking about countries like Qatar, and because you could remember they all funded the jihadists against Gaddafi. So they send them to Mali. And of course, France went there, and it didn't take long for Africans to realize that France actually didn't go to Mali to help Mali to fight the jihadists. France was part of the jihadists. They did everything to facilitate the control, or at least to keep Mali under the influence of jihadist forces. And these rebels, a sector of the African petty bourgeoisie in the military, in the Malian army, they say, wow, France is here not to help us, but France is here to pursue its own interests. And because of that, parts of the Malian leadership broke with France. They felt that they should do an alliance with another power, and that power was Russia. And you all know, you're familiar with the alliance between Malian leaders and also with Russia, and through what is known as Wagner. Wagner is supposed to be a private military group of private mercenaries, working, of course, in accord with the Russian government. And this has been basically a serious rupture, I would say, fracture between the African petty bourgeoisie and the French colonial bourgeoisie. For the first time, we have seen the African petty bourgeoisie being able to say no to the French ruling class, with France being capable to kill them, to overthrow them, because in every instance, every time there was an attempt to break from France, France always replied with fierce violence, overthrow the government, kill the leaders, and so on. And by the way, the president of Mali in the 60s, the one who united Nkrumah, the one who united Lumumba, the one who were ready for the unification of Africa at the time, his name Modibo Keïta, and he was overthrown, imprisoned, and of course assassinated. And France was part of that. So we're not looking at a new phenomenon, looking at a new phase of the same old struggle. African people trying to get rid of the colonizers, and it's happening at this time under the leadership of the African petty bourgeoisie. So this is one aspect of it. And the French launched operations, Serval, that's in 2012. You can Google it, Serval, that's S-E-R-V-A-L. And then they changed their operation. In fact, these are clandestine operations. They called the second operation, Operation Barkhane, which is B-A-R-K-H-A-N-E, which basically they spread it throughout what they call G5, 5 countries in Sahel, which include basically Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Chad, and Mauritania. So these are 5 countries. And it didn't take long. In the 2020, after the coup that basically withdrew or removed from power the French agent, when I say French agent, the president of Mali at the time, Ibrahim Babacar Keïta, and it was replaced by a new leadership formed by young army officers led by Amissi Goïta, who is the current president of Mali. So he came to power in 2020. And this inspired a new, basically, wave of resistance in Mali, but also throughout West Africa. You really have to bear in mind that Mali breaking away from France was not just a phenomenon that was limited to Mali alone. It was throughout West Africa that the Africans have been demanding for African countries, African leaders to break away from France control of CFA. And which means that in Burkina, which is next to Mali, for months before even the coup took place in Burkina, African masses, the African workers, the African people were doing everything to prevent France military convoy. So basically, you have French lorries carrying weapons and things like that to go to Mali. And the masses of Africans did everything they could to stop that. They would stone their convoy with stones, basically. They did that for months. So what I'm trying to say, mobilization was taking place already against French imperialism in all those countries. And of course, and before we know it, in 2022, basically, there was another coup in Burkina Faso. And that coup basically brought a new leadership in power. That's the leadership of Ibrahim Traoré. And Ibrahim Traoré considers himself as a follower of Thomas Sankara. And so we can say is Thomas Sankara didn't die in vain, because now there is a kind of a resurgence of ideas, of a celebration of Thomas Sankara, which is a good thing, which basically helped the people to discover, correct leadership by following the teachings of Thomas Sankara. But for France, that was just one country on the top of Mali. They couldn't deal with Mali. Now they had to deal with Burkina Faso. And the struggle in Burkina Faso, basically, what it did, it galvanized the people in Mali, and it galvanized the entire West Africa population. So it was just a matter of time before another place in Africa, France became incapable to control that place. And that came early, basically, I would say, this year with the struggle in Niger. The coup in Niger just was too much for France. They couldn't handle Mali. They couldn't handle Burkina Faso. Now they have to deal with Niger. That's three places. That's three countries. That's three populations for France to deal with. And very quickly, those three countries start working together. They even signed a pact of mutual assistance, mutual defense. If you attack Mali, it means Burkina Faso and Niger should come to the rescue, to the assistance of Mali. And if you attack Niger, the rest of those two countries will come to the assistance. And you also have to remember those three places, Mali, Niger, and Mali, they also have, to a certain extent, the benefit of Guinea. There was also a coup in Guinea 3 years early, where now army officers also captured power. And although the dynamic is not the same between Guinea and the three countries, but what it does, it basically confirms in the mind of many African people that France is losing control, that France has to be chased out of Africa. And so when you take what's happening in Guinea, and we cannot forget what happened already in Central African Republic. Over Central African Republic is not what you consider West Africa, because in the center of Africa, but it was one of the first place, if not the first place, where the African Petty Bourgeoisie was able to make an alliance with the Wagner military, private military group to prevent French ruling class from overthrowing the government of Central African Republic. So you could add that also in the equation. So you have a reality where in what they call France area of control of Francophone Africa, it became clear, it became obvious to the African Petty Bourgeoisie, to the people around the world, that France can no longer control those countries in Africa. France is losing control. France is being kicked out. You can read international press. They start talking about it, that France is losing. France is losing in all those countries. And the France arguments to justify why they're being kicked out of Africa, they all came with things like there is a anti-France sentiment, stuff like that, which definitely doesn't explain anything. But in reality, Africans, we base things on our own experience. That France has been there for centuries, particularly after the 60s. Everyone can see that France is looting every single country in Africa. And particularly the question of colonial CFA, the currency, is really profound in Francophone Africa, really profound. People despise it. People don't want to have it. People just want to have their own currency. And any leader who uses that as a weapon to mobilize the people, gets support from the masses. And this part of the things, basically, you see in Mali, you see in Guinea, you see in Burkina Faso, you also see in Mali as well. So the crisis in West Africa is a part of the crisis in Sahel. And Sahel, as you know, stretches from Atlantic coast to the Red Sea coast is throughout Africa. So it's not just these three countries I've been talking about for a while. It includes Somali, includes Sudan, and you already know in Somali, the situation is really, really, really just bad for the people, because the United States have been working for a long time to fracture Somali, to break the unity of Somali, to Somali split. There is no there is not a proper functioning government. In a sense, the bourgeoisie defines it. That's in Somalia alone. You have military bases in Somalia, in Djibouti in particular, because Djibouti is part of Somalia that's been fragmented, removed from Somalia by the French. And if you take Djibouti, and Djibouti just faces Saudi Arabia, which is on the other side of the Red Sea. It faces Yemen, because Yemen, Saudi Arabia on the other side of the Red Sea. And you have military bases that belongs to the United States, the French, the Japanese, and the Chinese. You go these four countries, they have military bases in Djibouti by the Red Sea, just to control the traffic. We are told at least 40% of the world trade goes through that, because from the Red Sea you can go through Suez Canal and then to the Mediterranean, and then you can go through Europe. So it's a strategic place. Not only you have Somali that is in war initiated, definitely by the United States, who every day kills Africans there, attacks what they refer to as the Al-Shahab all the time. And you also have Sudan. And Sudan also is part of the Sahel. And you know, Sudan has been split by the initiative of the United States. The United States attacked Sudan and split Sudan. Now you have Sudan and South Sudan. And the United States continues to work to split South Sudan, because there is always warfare, or a level of warfare going on between the main or the two largest ethnic groups in South Sudan. But today, you have a new war, I'm sure you're familiar with, that's taking place between two generals in Sudan. And the United States is involved in that. And Saudi Arabia, they are also involved in that. You have these two generals who are fighting for control of Sudan. And this can't be separated from the example I gave earlier on regarding what happened to Libya, where the United States and its allies have basically split Libya almost in three factions. And the war is still going on in Libya. So you can't separate all these things from each other, because they are all part of the NATO country, of the traditional colonizers, and also, of course, the new pretenders, basically to solve their problems at the expense of African people. So the unity of Africa is always under assault, because why you want to create three Libya? Why you want to create? They have already created two Sudan. Now they want to create. Well, how many Sudans do they want to create? And part of the crisis is that they failed at split Mali, because that's basically what the French were working at, to split Mali, to fracture Mali. So Africans, Mali, being able to make this alliance they did with the Russians to prevent France from being able to split Mali is a major failure for France, because from what I can see now, Malian government is able to recapture part of the territories that couldn't control after more than 10 years of cooperation with France. And also, we should never forget that when we say there is war in Mali or there is war in Niger, never forget that Niger and Mali are strategically linked to what? To Algeria. And Algeria, just like Libya, are targets of the colonizers. You know, when they overthrew Gaddafi, they stole hundred of billion of dollars from Libya. Today, the bourgeois press doesn't talk about that, but it was stolen by the United States, by Britain, by France. They stole all this amount of wealth from Libya. That's one of the reasons also they went to Libya. And Algeria has a lot of wealth, a lot of assets, a lot of currencies. We're talking about 100 of billion of dollars that Algeria has. Algeria has gas, you know, oil, just like the rest of the region. This is the target. This is the target of France. This is the target of the United States. So the war in Mali is also basically a war on Algeria. And Algeria understand it. And Algeria is also part of what's going on in Sahel, that they will not accept a defeat of the Malian government in Mali. They will not accept it because they know if Malian government was defeated, Algeria is next. So they do absolutely understand that. And on top of that, there are other aspects, because we talk about war. We talk about the French armies, the French military bases. We're talking about the United States military bases. We're talking about Africa, things like that. The United States and France, to cover this war they're doing for Africa, particularly in that region, they label their war on the jihadists, on the Islamists. And we have seen France being in Mali for over 10 years, working with them. And when it comes to Somali, they talk about war against terrorists, something like that. But these are counterinsurgency operations run by France and the United States and the rest of NATO. Because while you have, when France was in Mali, it was on alone. He was there with German troops. He was there with Danish troops, Swedish troops, basically the rest of the EU countries. They were there in Mali. And the new government of Mali asking France to leave has been a victory for the people of Mali and for the people of Africa in general, just to get the imperialists out of Mali. The French are out. The French ambassador was expelled. This was unheard of. Nobody in Francophone Africa can expel a French ambassador. So the Malian government expelled him out. And the same thing in Niger. And you saw that throughout the August, September, the French government refused to leave. They asked the ambassador to get out of Niger. They say they're not leaving. You are in Africa. And the country where you are, the leadership says you should get out. The French refused to go. But finally, they left. But what's happening right now, France is doing in a big way. One, in Mali, French language is no longer an official language. And Burkina Faso is following. And Algeria also is following. So you see here a reaction, country after country. And I don't think it will stop with Algeria, because France is the weakest link of white power in Africa at the moment. So it makes sense that France is being pushed out. But at the same time, it does not mean that imperialism is gone, because history teaches us whenever a weaker imperialist is being challenged, it's being replaced by the United States. That was the case in Angola. Portuguese being pushed out, the US stepped in. That was the case in the Congo. The Belgian being pushed out, the United States stepped in. That was true in Vietnam. The French being pushed out, the United States stepped in. And that's why African internationalism is critical. That's why the work of the African People's Party Chairman of Mali is critical, because we are the one telling everybody we have to understand the system in its totality. And the whole system in its totality, they defend the number one of this system in the United States imperialism. And that has to be clear to all Africans. So when we say, yes, France out of imperialism, but we mean the whole white power out of Africa, led, of course, by the United States of America. That is something very critical. And I also want to just talk of a few other aspects of it. Every war you see in Africa, and Sahel is no exception, is war for resources. It's not just Mali versus France, or Burkina Faso versus France, or Africa, Francophone versus France. Is African people fighting against colonialism as a mode of production in its totality. In its totality. So the struggle we're fighting in West Africa or in East Africa, in Somalia, is a struggle against the old parasitic system of colonialism as a mode of protection. Is our struggle. It doesn't matter where we are located. It's our struggle. and the struggle for uranium. Without our uranium, France will not have light. 75% of French electricity comes from the uranium. And at least 50% of it comes from Africa, comes from Niger and also Namibia. And we also have to understand that it's not just France that use that uranium. At least a quarter of Europe use that uranium too. France exported electricity throughout Europe. So it's a struggle that has direct repercussions inside France and inside Europe. That's why we have to intervene wherever we are to make people understand that the foundation for every contradiction in Europe is in a colonial mode of protection. That's really fundamental. And this struggle is also a struggle not just to control raw material like uranium, like gas, and those kind of things. It's also a struggle to control the trade routes. The trade route. That's why we have the Red Sea is full of military vessels. The United States, the Japanese, the Chinese, the Russians, everybody's there except the African people. We are now patrolling the Red Sea. Everything we do, anything on the in the Red Sea, they call us pirates. You remember Somali pirates? They don't call these colonizers who are controlling the Red Sea. You know, they don't call them pirates. They call us pirates. And also, you have the ports. When I say trade routes, the ports throughout all the coast of Africa. If you take the West Africa, you go Conakry in Guinea, you have Abidjan in Ivory Coast, you go Lomé, to all these parts of controlling our wealth comes to Africa, and our wealth leave Africa. And you also have one of the arguments the French use, and the US too. They say they're fighting drugs in Africa, in West Africa, which basically covers the reality that they're fighting to control Africa, to control our Africa, our wealth and everything, the trade routes, everything. And all of a sudden, there is cocaine, there is opium in West Africa. And that's the US and France at work. That's a counter-insurgency. So they can all the time, whenever it pleases them, say to the world, they're fighting drugs in West Africa. But in reality, they're fighting to maintain the colonial mode of production. They're fighting to maintain Africa as a place where all the wealth they need to have a modern bourgeois life come from. So this is one aspect. And the other aspect of it, you cannot have these wars in Africa without the collective leadership of the colonizers, and usually is hidden through UN, the MONUSCO. Like in the Congo is MONUSCO, in Mali, West Africa is MINUSMA. So not only you had French troops and German troops and all of them, and but they come under the cover, they combine it under the cover of MINUSMA. So when you hear MINUSMA, you don't know German troops are there. You don't know Danish troops are there. But Danish troops, German troops, British troops, Swedish troops, all these troops are NATO troops. And NATO troops go to Africa to carry the missions of NATO, because UN is just a collective leadership. It's a tool they use basically to give a cover to their work in Africa. And also, the struggle in West Africa, as I said earlier on, has repercussion in France. You remember the June uprising that took place in France when this young North African was killed by the French police. So you have an ongoing ideological assault on Islam in France. Ongoing, of course, in Sweden too, in Germany too, particularly this country in Holland, where someone from the far right just won the election. You know, in France, as we know, the leading political organization in France is what they call National Front. They changed the name to Rassemblement National, which is basically the same organization. And the ideology of this organization clearly mobilizes white people against colonized people, but covered as a war against jihadists, against Islam, and something like that. And you can't separate that from what's taking place in West Africa, because that's what that's the cover France uses to say that in West Africa to fight the jihadists. That's also they're doing in Europe, saying that what they're doing is protecting France from jihadists, something like that. When in reality is ideological cover basically to attack African working class inside France, which is basically the African from West Africa and the African from North Africa. And these two forces are key in any struggle to end colonialism as a mode of production inside Europe. Any serious struggle that's taking place in France that really shakes France has to have inside it the Africans from West Africa and the Africans from North Africa. So you can't separate these two. And the other thing, of course, I want to talk about is just the significance of the African working class, the significance of African nation itself, because everyone is used to it. You have seen Africans in Mali, in Guinea, in Chad, throughout Africa, raising the flags of Russia, because they see the alliance between African people bourgeoisie and the Russian leadership as a way forward. They don't see the unification of the African working class, unification of the African nation. They don't see the necessity of our own black power as an answer. They don't really see that we need to have our own flag that projects black power. They don't see that. And this is the work we do. This is the significance of this study, that we are, we welcome this crisis, the intervention of Russia or China, giving the African people bourgeoisie an alternative, contribute to the crisis. But what is our own response? That is critical. What is our own power? That is critical. And we intervene. With African internationalism and Chairman leadership, we're saying clearly that the mobilization in Africa is a good thing, but it must be a coherent mobilization. The end must be clear. At that end, we must be, continue to work on Nkrumah, the work on Garvey, propel their work forward, but under the new leadership, who has a vision of the future for Africa. One Africa, one nation, under the leadership of the African working class. And that struggle is key, because our main enemy is the colonial mode of production that is led by the colonial bourgeoisie. And this has to go. For us to have any genuine peace, any genuine happiness, the struggle has to achieve a new level of clarity, that the struggle everywhere on African continent is the struggle to end colonialism as a mode of production. And every struggle has to have its own leadership, its own philosophy. Although the African people bourgeoisie is still in the leadership, but they are fighting a different struggle. They're fighting for a struggle that will consolidate their power as African people bourgeoisie. They're fighting in a struggle defined by others. People saying multipolar world, for example. But India has power, Russia has power, our, centers of power exist. But where is the power of black people? Where is it? You can't be in a multipolar world if you're not yourself, you're not a center of power. And that has to be the struggle of the African working class. That's the struggle of African Socialist International. That's really, really critical, that we are part of this struggle. We are part of the effort to change the world. We are part of it. And there is no way you can get around that. So we welcome basically the return of African masses. I don't know if I still have some second to say, to use. I want to bring one more issue, is the issue of immigration. The issue of immigration is critical. Not only it's critical because right now in Britain here, immigration has been, it's a frontline question. Britain sending, they're struggling to send asylum seekers to Rwanda, for example. In France, everybody knows the issue of immigration determines who's going to win elections. At least you should not be popular in France. You have to attack the colonized people. You have to attack immigration of colonized people. But the problem is, right now, from West Africa to North Africa, Africans are dying just to cross the desert. We're dying there. And when we are in North Africa, because of the war imposed on Libya by the United States, France, Britain, and others, you have bandits, jihadists, people like that, all kind of criminal groups. They using immigration to capture Africans, torture them, extract money from them. So not only dying in that fashion, we also dying just to cross the sea. Just to cross the sea. We're using all these boats of fortune when you don't know if you sink within 5 minutes or 10 minutes before you cross the Mediterranean. That's every week Africans are dying, every single week. And because what's going on in West Africa, the African working class is not in power, because the solution we have in West Africa at the moment, although it does contribute to deepening the crisis, but it's the African petty bourgeoisie solution. So we need a solution that coming in from the African working class, at least in the lead. The African petty bourgeoisie can participate, but African working class must be in the lead. So that's a serious struggle. The struggle to win and convince the African working class that you must be in the lead. This is a revolutionary struggle. That's a cultural revolutionary shift that needs to happen, that the African working class begin to see ourselves as producers of wealth, but also as leaders of the African nation. That's no small thing. This requires, but this study we're doing in others struggle with your lead to be, widely accessible to the people, and so on. And the situation also in West Africa is also critical, because the rise of, or the lose, or the defeat of France in Niger, Burkina, and Mali is a direct existential threat to French imperialism, because France's significance in the world depends on Africa. Without Africa, France will not be different from Lithuania, Latvia, Bulgaria, all those places. So what's going on in Cote d'Ivoire and Senegal is just, I can't begin to tell you about those two countries. Because should France lose Cote d'Ivoire or Senegal, there will be an acceleration of a history in Africa. So France has military bases in Ivory Coast. So it is in Senegal. Struggle is taking place in those places. And that's why Africans should be aware of that. And all the work we do as struggles continue to take place throughout West Africa, but to keep your eyes on Ivory Coast and Senegal. This is, of course, there is also Chad, these three places, but Cote d'Ivoire is where France makes really huge benefit, huge colonial benefit. Cote d'Ivoire is just like they used to call Haiti the pearl of our Antilles. Cote d'Ivoire represent that, I should say. That's where we are. So, and if I have to conclude here, we just want people to be aware that what we're looking at a challenge that get everything open, the greatness of France, because in West Africa, France has been a big player for a long time. The greatness of France, the significance of France is at stake. And the French society is aware of it, because it's being discussed on a regular basis what France should do to stay in Africa. This has been discussed from the left, from the right, almost on a daily basis, what France should do to stay in Africa, which means what France should do to maintain its standing in the world. And we also have to continue to deepen the discussion. What we should do to win more and more people in West Africa and throughout Africa, indeed, to African internationalism. That is really critical. That's where we are at. And as you know, the history is moving forward. Change is happening every day. And we're in a greater place. France will never be France again. That's what we can guarantee that. That's gone. It's just how we can finish off the work. That's really the point. How can we finish off the work so we can move to a higher stage of African resistance and African pushing back the colonizers, getting them out of Africa and unifying all our people. So I just want to thank everyone for your patience. And once again, it's a privilege for me to be in this program. Do not forget to share 50 times each person. Oh, comrades.
Uhuru, Secretary General Luwezi Kinshasa. That was a brilliant presentation, and just want to really recognize, France isn't the only one, right? As you've laid out, that's fighting for its standing in the world. And we see this, the whole colonial mode of production and the colonial ruling class just up in an uproar, in a state of serious existential crisis, all engaged in the same struggle as you've just brilliantly laid out. And just want to reiterate that this is African internationalism. This explanation, this analysis that, we're able to have this discussion with is the theory of African internationalism, which was born through the struggle for African liberation and developed by Chairman Omali Yeshitela, who came out of the period of the Black Revolution of the 1960s with the intent to complete that revolution, and was determined to answer all of the outstanding questions left unresolved through the counterinsurgency, the military defeat of our struggle that didn't just take place in the US, as we know, but took place everywhere it was that Africans were organizing. We know Patrice Lumumba, Kwame Nkrumah efforts circumvented, through the counterinsurgency. So this is just, again, want to reiterate the brilliance that comes from the African working class to articulate, understand our own struggles, to define our own path, and and the way forward. And just really want to again salute this overview, which looked at what's happening in Africa right now, but let us know that it's not a new phenomenon, and that it's rooted in, like you said, SG, a 600-year historical process of stealing, raping, and exploiting the resources of Africa, leading to the birth of this global parasitic social system we now know as the colonial mode of production. And the colonial powers, led by the US, are all fighting to maintain its domination over Africa's resources. The opportunists are fighting for their ability to control Africa's resources. And this is why we assert that we are our own liberators, and that the African working class must lead. And just making the point, as the chairman, has stated, that everyone in the world has an Africa plan, and we see that playing out right now. They have an Africa plan because they recognize the significance of Africa to the entire planet. And the question for African people is, what is our Africa plan? And we see this plan in motion, though it's not just a question we ask ourselves, but it's something that we have been, struggling to bring, into being through the process of the African Socialist International, and the work, of our party and movement. So again, thank you so much, SG. Please stick around, because if we have some time for questions and answers, I know that people will definitely want to and have already raised questions and posed them to you. So thank you so much, Uhuru. And when we talk about this greater understanding, we have to look at who's responsible, for that, who's allowed us to achieve this greater understanding of the colonial mode of production. And that's the leader of the African nation and the worldwide African revolution, the leading theoretician and author of African internationalism. And that's Chairman Omali Yeshitela. And with that, I have the honor of bringing him onto this study this morning. Want to just salute your leadership, Chairman, and just know that this discussion that we're having right now, no one else is having this discussion with the intent to free Africa to with recognition that the African working class must lead and that the colonial mode of production must be destroyed. It's coming from this party, and it's coming from the leadership of the chairman, and that just is something that has to be widely recognized. So everybody hit that share button 50 times, as Eshi Luwezi said, because here is our leadership, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. Over to Chairman.
Uhuru. First of all, thank you very much, Comrade Director Akile. And I really want to express profound appreciation for the presentation that has just come from Comrade Luwezi Kinshasa. And it would be inappropriate for me not to say that he is also the Secretary General of the African Socialist International, which is the African People's Socialist Party spread throughout the world. It's important to say that because it helps us to remember that we are not just engaged in a talk fest. This is not just a situation of collecting information, as does occur in many of the discussions that we see trying to define the situation in the world, or even what might be happening in the Sahel. I want to also say, brothers and sisters, that it is really important to salute the sisters and brothers on the continent of Africa, where we are. This discussion right now is obviously concentrated when we're talking about the Sahel. And one reason it's important to do that, the Comrade Secretary General Luwezi just talked about all the wealth being taken out of Africa, being taken out of the region characterized as the Sahel that lights the homes of people throughout Europe and other places for that matter, on the one hand. But on the other hand, in Africa, it's a dark continent. And by this, I mean that there is very, very little light. There's very, very little power that is provided for the benefit of African people ourselves. So I want to just shout out to you and salute you, comrades. And I know it's difficult for Africans, generally speaking, throughout the world and in the United States as well, but I know that there's a hell of a burden that you carry, in part because of the fact that so many of us have been taken from Africa, where you are, and we are not able to produce in Africa for ourselves, but we've been producing for Europe, for colonizers in various parts of the world for the longest period of time. So I recognize that every time I'm on the continent, whether I'm in Sierra Leone, whether I am in South Africa, in one of the shanties towns, or whether I am in Ghana, some other place, that when I see the absence of roads, streets, and what have you, when I experience the absence of light, when there is no running water in this vast, miraculous, wonderful, beautiful Africa, I know the reason there is no running water there in Sierra Leone is because that water is being diverted to places like Paris, to places like New York, to places like London, and what have you. So I want to salute all of you. And also, I think it's important that you are there doing the work where you are in Africa. I think it's important that you're part of the party because it punctuates the fact that we are talking about the liberation of one Africa, one African people. We've been dispersed, and war is being made to make sure that we never come back together again in order to pursue our own interests. So I wanted to say that. Someone told me, drew my attention rather to the fact that there's an article in today's New York Times where they are entertaining the question or addressing the question of why is it that the colonial question, people are talking about colonialism all around the world today. Why is it that this discussion seems to be centered on Palestine, I'm told, but generally speaking, it recognizes that the issue of colonialism is something that has now resurfaced miraculously. Where the hell did it come from? Why is everybody talking about colonialism? And in fact, all they had to do was go to apspuhuru.org or make a phone call to one of our offices someplace in the world, even in what might be characterized as shanty towns or one of the townships in South Africa. Go and ask us in Sierra Leone, where we've been relegated to extreme poverty and no access to the New York Times and other platforms such as this. We'll tell you where it came from. It came from the struggle of African people under the leadership of the Advanced Detachment's own revolutionary working class party that has been working for the last 50 years or more to reintroduce this critical question after the military defeat of the Black Revolution of the 1960s that murdered and imprisoned the leading advocates of colonialism, that made it possible for you to disappear that question. The New York Times played a role in that as well. So that those discussion has happened is, after, we murdered Lumumba, wasn't that enough? We overthrew Nkrumah, wasn't that enough? We killed Panthers and we wounded and captured and murdered Che Guevara, and this was supposed to have eradicated the question of colonialism. But now this discussion continues to happen. And it's happening in part, primarily as a consequence of the role the African People's Socialist Party has played in resurrecting this question, giving direction to this question. That's the reason we're here today having this discussion about what is characterized as the Sahel in Africa. The fact is that colonized masses around the world hate colonialism. Without even knowing necessarily what its name is, people hate colonialism. Nobody willingly and voluntarily sacrifices our dignity, our humanity, our right to benefit from our labor, from our lands, from the genius that has come as a consequence of having lived in this world. Nobody voluntarily sacrifices the future of our children. It can only come with extreme brutality. It comes with the brutality that's rooted in a particular kind of way that society get what is required to exist. And up to now, prior to the development of the African internationalism as a revolutionary theory, people have been able to, countries have been able to, organizations have been able to discuss this issue of society only as something that's reflecting their own immediate kind of circumstances and the so-called countries that they exist in France and in England, or even they might take Mali and think that they can describe and define what is there as society. But the definition of society has changed. It is no longer something adequate to utilize definitions that might have come about during a period of feudalism in Europe. That's defined by the domination of a particular society by a ruling elite that lords and nobilities and where you had kings and queens and the Catholic Church dominating everything and everybody all the time, where the majority of the people labored as peasants and labored as serfs, serving the interests of a sector of the population that sucked their blood, and no matter how hard they worked, they did not get total benefit of everything that they produced. Most of it went to this ruling elite, this nobility, etc. And it was the overthrow of this nobility that is attributed to the rise of the capitalist system. This was called feudalism. This is how people have been taught that we've reached this place they define as a capitalist mode of production, from a feudal mode of production in Europe, we are told, and what became Europe, because it wasn't always there. From this feudal mode of production, we are told that there emerged this capitalist mode of production that's defined differently. But still, the problem is that they are defining society as particular and peculiar to these areas of mainly of Europe, and sometimes they go outside of Europe where people are located in particular areas and regions. But society changed, and it has changed. The definition of society has changed, or we have redefine society, to help people get a better view of what it is we're looking at in the world, because that society is something that is characterized by certain kinds of relationships and structures and what have you. And a primary thing about society is, of course, all human society, since it has come into existence, has been something that is defined by the struggle to produce and reproduce life. I mean, this is the fundamental, essential thing that characterizes and defines society itself. People are engaged through necessity to produce and reproduce human life. If that particular activity is ignored, or somehow if that particular activity is diverted, if somehow that particular activity is undermined, there is not going to be any people. There are not going to be any people. There is not going to be any society. You can forget religion, as some people would try to put forth as the driving force in society, and culture and genetics and all that stuff. You don't have any of that without an ongoing process of production and reproduction of human life. And this work, this activity of producing life, is something that has expanded exponentially over periods of time. At one juncture, we could see sectors of society engaged in this in smaller groupings that might even be characterized as families and tribes and clans and stuff like that. But that's not the case anymore. When Portugal stepped out of this little tiny Portugal, and you must really think about this, and if you haven't ever done it, go to a map and look at Portugal and see where Portugal is. This thing that sometimes I laughingly and jokingly refer to as sort of like an appendix on Europe. Nobody figured out what the hell it was there for. It didn't mean that much, generally speaking, in the world until in 1415, this group, these Portuguese, left Portugal and went into Africa and initiated the process of capturing Black people, developing economic activity in the Madeira Islands, where you saw the emergence of sugar plantations and the development of certain production outside of Europe. This didn't happen in Europe, this happened outside of Europe. And you begin to see this process emerging, and it's also something that began to train and teach the rest of people who lived in this territory that approximates Portugal, that lived in this general territory that we would ultimately come to know as Europe. These forces learned that the way to quick development, the way to get resources, to remove them oneself from the domination of a nobility. And, you know, we haven't talked that much about just the cruelties of European feudalism, and not just in general terms, but specifically how this thing articulated itself in the lives of the people who lived in what we now know as Europe. I mean, you know, things where the priest would have you know, first night with a bride to make sure that she was pure and virginal, going into marriage. I mean, just nasty kinds of stuff that existed in terms of just expropriation of all kinds of value that human beings were creating, demeaning stuff that went on, and poverty that's hard for us to imagine. Poverty worse than what we've seen in even most of Africa, where the resources are ripped off every day, that creates the conditions that Comrade Secretary General Luwezi Kinshasa talked about, of people just trying to get the hell out of Africa, get on a boat, not even knowing that they're chasing their own resources when they try to cross that Mediterranean to get to Europe. And they're trying to do that because they've seen visions, pictures of resources that's there, not knowing that those resources came from Africa and have been transformed, et cetera. And so this is a kind of reality that a relationship that we're talking about that existed in the world. And so you had this European feudalism, horrible conditions of existence, and a nobility that was its ruling class. This feudalism got overturned, and all kinds of myths and fantasies have been created about why, you know, feudalism went away and capitalism was born, And it used to be where people might make a hat. You had 2 or 3 separate hat makers who were just making their little hats by themselves and trying to sell them. And then somebody got smart and said, let's get all together and make hats together. Then you create what they call all this nonsense about how this emerged. Because in order to explain this reality, they had to explain the reality in a fashion that complemented the development of Europe based on what development of what came to be known as Europe based on internal contradiction, internal sources. They could not admit, they could not say that we went out and stole all of this, robbed, murdered. A society doesn't define itself in that fashion unless it's absolutely forced to do it. That's why you have a Santa Claus myth, you know, where people are going to wake up and a few children, and some of them are going to be African children, going to wake up in a few weeks from now, and there are going to be gifts under this tree. They're going to, if there is a tree, they're going to be gifts given, and there's this notion that these gifts came from a mysterious place where it's actually too cold to work and produce anything significantly. And it wasn't done by human beings, but by these mysterious little people who created for this jolly fat guy who's lost a lot of weight since then, because since it started out, since a fat Santa Claus is characterized as kind of unhealthy being. But up to recently, this fat white guy, comes and drops off all this stuff for the good people and nothing for the bad people. And this is just another popular means by which a relationship is defined. A relationship that says that you got all this stuff because we're good. This is where we got it from. Not that we worked for it. We didn't have to work for it. We can't prove that we worked for it. We can't show that we worked for it. It came from this materialist place, and little short people who, not even people, these entities created all this stuff and then dropped it off because we're good. This is the mythology that has accompanied a particular relationship that has been obscured, disguised, so that the people do not understand what the hell is going on. But we understand, and that's what we're talking about today. So much of this discussion has its origin in looking at what's happening in the Sahel and the brutality of what's happening in the Sahel. And we're talking about how France is losing its grip on the world, and France must go, etc. But it's not just something that's happening in the Sahel, and it's worth mentioning that because even as France is being driven ostensibly, immediately out of Africa, there's this war that's been made in Palestine, where people are suffering more or less the same kinds of contradictions from the same kinds of relationship that we're talking about existing all over Africa. There's the same kind of war that we're engaged in. People want to live, and people want to do what comes naturally to folk who try to produce life, who want to enjoy life, who want to and do this benefiting from their own resources and their own labor. But that's not possible under colonialism, because colonialism is a social is something that comes into existence at the expense of the rights, the resources of other peoples, etc. So that's what we're looking at across the world. And so when we talk about really colonialism, we're not just talking about a relationship between Africans. We're not just talking about a relationship between Africans and the white man or Europeans. We're talking about relationships that exist in the whole world. That the whole world is defined by this colonial mode of production. The whole entire world is defined by that. The entire world is defined by the fact that society now embraces the world. It's not just something that's peculiar to what might have been characterized as London or Paris or something like that. The emergence of a colonial mode of production, the whole social system now, how everybody in the world is connected to a process of creating and recreating life, a common process, as quietly as it's kept. There is no place where labor where people are engaged in production that is not connected to people's every place else in the world. There's this process that unites everybody in the world. That's what colonialism did. The destruction of European feudalism came about as a consequence of Europe going out of Europe, of people going out of this place that's now defined as Europe, in fact, achieving a definition as Europe as a consequence of leaving this place, and then going out and capturing resources and human beings every place else, and creating, for the first time in human history, a world economy. This is what we mean when we say that the definition of society has to be changed. You cannot define how things occur now based on what happened during European feudalism. You can't say that there used to be feudalism in France and now there's capitalism in France, etc. What has happened is there used to be feudalism in this place that we know as France now, that now has capitalism as a consequence of a colonial mode of production that pulled all of it together. That's why when we look at Palestine, we are looking at what is characterized as the Sahel. I think it's really important for us to recognize that a single world economy that all of us are locked into and cannot be dragged into a situation defining reality based on how they would define what's happening in St. Louis, what's happening in New York, what's happening in the United States, and then somehow France can be this villain in Africa, but the U.S. is not. But Germany is not. But that's why Germany, France, all of them are in the same place, and that's why this whole notion. Somebody talk about how I think Comrade Secretary General, made the really important observation that you have a situation where people are burning French flags and destroying French flags, and they're carrying Russian flags. They're not carrying an African. They're not carrying a red, black, and green African flag. They're carrying a Russian flag. And of course, Russia has its own objectives there. France, China has its own objectives in Africa. That's natural and normal. But what are the objectives of Africa? Africa cannot have objectives unless it is conscious of those objectives as Africa and not just as Burkina Faso, or not just as some single entity. I want to read this to you quickly. This is, I think I'm going to share with you the manifesto of the African Socialist International, because I think that's important. Because while we're talking specifically about the Sahel, the reality is the African People's Socialist Party said a long time ago that we are looking at a single revolutionary project that embraces Africa. And this is something that we can talk about easily, and it's easily to see that being the case. But I just want to read this from the manifesto of the African Socialist International to make this point and why the Sahel is important to us and what we see in the Sahel, and why it's not good enough just what's happening in Niger or Mali or Burkina Faso. Remember Thomas Sankara, extraordinary revolutionary leader in Burkina Faso, the one who gave Burkina Faso the name of a place of upright people. For 3 or 4 years, oversaw an amazing project there, almost eradicated illiteracy there. Nothing that happened under French neocolonialism. Had planted more than several million trees to push back the desert in the Sahel. As you know, the Sahel is that region that is separating what is characterized as North Africa from the Sahara Desert, the Sahel there, and there's a growing desertification that's occurring, and Sankara took that on. Sankara raised up the situation of women for the first time, had women in the cabinet, in his cabinet, leadership, etc. This is part of what Sankara did. So this was what he did. And yet, with all of these amazing developments and whatever, he wouldn't take any loans. He divorced himself from the IMF and the money and the World Bank, etc., and said, we can do this on our own, and set out to prove it. And they began to do it on their own. They made an assault, vaccinated everybody so against kinds of disease, polio and other things that were crippling people there. Sankara did this stuff in a matter of 4 years, just amazing transformation there, and then they killed him. And right now, even as we're having this discussion, even as all attention is on Palestine, there's maneuvering going on right now that's trying to show, provide evidence that this undemocratic occurrence that happened in Mali and Burkina Faso and all these other places where these neo-colonial puppets, whose only function was to shovel out resources from Mali, from Burkina Faso, from Niger, and all these other places to France, that somehow, and when these puppets were overthrown, it was an undemocratic act. It was an assault on democracy. Not recognizing, of course, you can't have a greater assault on democracy than colonial slavery, which is what dominates the life of African people everywhere. So now we're seeing more and more articles appearing showing how, since the French have been kicked out, the jihadists, as they characterize them, and are making inroads in these various places in Africa, and more people are being killed now that the French are gone. And obviously what they're doing is producing a rationale for more intervention in Niger, in Mali, in Burkina Faso, and other places like that, so they can do the same thing to this new Thomas Sankara that they did to the last Thomas Sankara. This is what they're trying to create. They create this, and they got Palestine over here as a single thing, and in Palestine, of course, the bad guy is reactionary Netanyahu, and this is how a situation has been characterized for us, but we don't agree with that. And I just want to read this as the manifesto of the African Socialist International. Then, we'll be able to say some other things. But this was passed in April of 2000, a conference to build the African Socialist International. This happened in London, England. It says this was something that was organized by the African People's Socialist Party. And we organized it because we have always understood that the struggle was for the total liberation of all Africa and all African people. And that we had concluded some time ago that there was not going to be a Ghana revolution that liberated us, or a Congo, or a Black revolution in the United States, that the revolutionary movement of African people that run into its limitations, as long as we're fighting it within the borders that have been created by the colonial powers. Look at what we saw. I mentioned, Thomas Sankara, he makes the revolution, they kill him. Patrice Lumumba, he comes to power to try to revolutionize the relationships between African people and Africa and the rest of it. They kill him. Look at Nkrumah, the magnificent Nkrumah. They overturned his government and killed him. The fact is, that's the way the thing happens, as long as we are dealing and not recognizing the connectedness of the whole revolutionary project. When I say the connectedness, I'm talking about even as it relates to Europe and North America. When I say North America in this instance, I'm not talking about the indigenous peoples here. I'm talking about the North Americans and Europeans, the Europeans who are North Americans, etc. So this was passed again, April of 2020, because we got to resolve this contradiction for the liberation of our people, because we're tired of seeing the murder that's happening to us in various places, distinct places, and not having a decent explanation about what the hell is going on, because we know that the African Revolution will not succeed any place on earth as long as we're fighting it within these borders that have been created by the colonizers. This will not allow it to happen. So it says here, African people throughout the world are rising up. We have entered into the new millennium in motion, struggling to overturn the 500-year legacy of oppression and exploitation to which we have been subjected by a parasitic social system born at our expense. We are fighting to reclaim our destiny as a single people whose forced dispersal in a world defined by artificial borders has served to undermine our common identity and dilute our collective strength. That's speaking to Sahel. We are everywhere. We're in Chicago, Illinois, in Florida, Texas, California, and New York, and throughout the United States and North America, as well as Toronto and Montreal and Canada. We are in Brasilia in Brazil, Caracas in Venezuela, Bluefields in Nicaragua and Central and South America. We are in Trinidad, Haiti, Jamaica, Guadeloupe, Martinique, Dominica, the Bahamas, Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, and Barbados, and all the islands of the Caribbean. We are in London, Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool, and Nottingham in England. By the way, this was written in the living room of Comrade Luwezi Kinshasa, the Secretary General, who is there now. We are in Paris, Lille, Lyon, Marseille, and Nice in France. We are in Brussels, Belgium, Amsterdam, Holland, Berlin, Germany, Rome, Italy, as well as Spain, Portugal, Russia, Turkey, and all of Eastern Europe. We reside in the hundreds of millions in our ancient motherland, which was the birthplace of humankind more than 150,000 years ago. There was no America 150,000 years ago. This land was here, but there was no America 150,000 years ago, and which served as the cradle of human civilization more than 10,000 years ago. The life and historical experience of our people over the last 500 years constitute the primary force that has given shape to the modern world. It is a world where the vast majority of the people on the planet Earth are living in starvation, misery, disease, ignorance, and terror. At the same time, Europe and North America control the world's wealth at gunpoint and rests upon the prostrate, bloody, and abscessed backs of the workers and peasants of Africa, Asia, and Latin America. The world capitalist economy began with Europe's assault on our Africa and the kidnapping, captivity, colonial enslavement, and dispersal of African people throughout what is now known as the Americas. The barbaric assault upon African people depopulated our motherland of hundreds of millions of human beings. It destroyed our ancient civilization and unleashed a European wave of mass murder that killed hundreds of millions of human beings through the slave-raiding wars. It left a trail of human carnage over the Middle Passage of the Atlantic Ocean and condemned the captive African people of the Americas to death through torture, miserable toil, and cultural annihilation. This initial assault upon Africa, along with the genocidal extermination of the indigenous peoples of the Americas and the looting of Asia and the Middle East, has lifted Europe out of millennia of disease, poverty, fratricidal warfare, and mass murder. Europe's militarism and aggression was a part of a culture whose economic base was built upon warfare and conquest between competing European tribes and kingdoms. Before this, there was no concept of Europe or white people as a monolithic group. Europe's nation states and continental unity were forged through its assault upon the world's peoples. This unity was consolidated through the conquest, invasion, enslavement of the peoples of Asia, and the carving up of the African continent by European colonial powers in the 19th century. Today, 1 billion African people throughout the world are engaged in a desperate struggle for survival within a world whose economic foundations were built through the theft of our labor and resources. African people comprise half the world's population that live on less than $2 a day. We are subjected to genocidal biological warfare through the use of AIDS, Ebola, and other often curable diseases, some of which have been manufactured for our destruction. Today, our motherland is undergoing a frenzy of rape and looting more intense and insidious than slavery. This takes the form of trade and so-called debt, which brings development to Europe, North America, and increasingly Japan, while it commits mass murder against our people through artificial famine, and the transformation of our homeland into an economic wasteland. However, we continue to struggle, and we will win. The historical experience of African people throughout the world has forged our people into a revolutionary nation comprised primarily of workers and poor peasants. We continue to form the critical army of labor for world imperialism in the mines of Congo, South Africa, and Zambia, in the plantations and farms of Ghana, the Ivory Coast, the Caribbean, in the factories of Detroit, Manchester, Lyon, and Brussels, as well as the hundreds of prison dungeons throughout the world, including those that hold 1 million African people captive in the United States of North America. Included among this massive force of African workers are the hundreds of millions of unemployed African laborers who constitute a massive reserve of labor pool for imperialism. Hunger and starvation are used as weapons of economic warfare aimed at suppressing the value of African labor power. Moreover, this labor force is to work day and night and to migrate from country to country and continent to continent just to eat. The laws that govern nature and the entire universe necessitates life and death and determine the rise of the new and the vanquishing of the old in an infinitely unfolding struggle between opposing forces. In the same way, we know that the resurrection of Africa and the African people is inevitable and it cannot be stopped. The liberation of Africa will be brought about through the coming worldwide upheaval of African workers and poor peasants, a sleeping giant poised to seize our freedom, happiness, and wealth from imperialist white power and deal at the death blow the world's people are waiting Africa to strike. While our Africa has been formally free from direct colonial rule and European domination, it suffers from an oppressive system that in fact maintains the domination of its former masters, often in partnership with a consortium of imperialist economic and financial interests based in the United States, Europe, and Japan. During the 1950s and 60s, a mass revolutionary upsurge took the world by storm. This revolutionary motion was many times expressed in the mobilization of armed African workers and peasants' resistance in Africa. African people never defeated the tyranny of African people forever defeated the tyranny of direct white colonial rule and domination. However, our victory was incomplete, for our movement succeeded only in defeating the open imperialist rule known as colonialism. The hidden indirect form of imperialist rule called neocolonialism by Kwame Nkrumah has reduced Africa and her people to a state of destitution and desperation not seen since the destruction and genocidal mass murder of the slave trade or the colonial wars of conquest unleashed by Europe during the late 19th century. The agents of neocolonialism, the extension of enemy power into the ranks of our own nation throughout the world, take the form of African primitive petty bourgeoisie. This tiny social class holds Africa in captivity in the service of imperialism and serves as a cover for continental white rule, for continued white rule and domination. This class sees the fate of African people as forever under the subjugation of white power. It has secured its own position of prestige and prosperity as collaborators with imperialism, which continues to control Africa's resources and loot Africa's wealth. The African primitive bourgeoisie, therefore, has no interest in Africa's liberation and unification or the emancipation of the hundreds of millions of African workers and peasants from famine and backbreaking toil. The mighty awakening of the African workers and poor peasants has unleashed convulsions throughout the continent through the toppling of Mobutu, the retreat of French imperialism, the upheaval and rebellions throughout Zimbabwe, Nigeria, the Central African Republic, Ivory Coast, Kenya, as well as in St. Petersburg, Florida. The rising up of African workers has Africa's neo-colonial traders and collaborators trembling in their boots. It is the workers and poor peasants who will overthrow the oppressive power of the African petty bourgeoisie over Africa in partnership with imperialism. This awakening will constitute an African revolution that will consolidate our national consciousness, culture, and identity through mass struggle on an international scale. It will constitute the final offensive against imperialist white power, which will have nowhere left to run as the oppressed hundreds of millions of African workers and poor peasants consciously pursue our historic mission of the total unification of the African continent and African people throughout the world. Never again will we allow our people to be slaves or to be divided by languages and ethnic groups, false borders, or false micro-nationalities. This awakening African people stand at the vanguard of the struggle of the world's oppressed people to build a new world in which the currently endured humiliation, famine, terror, and disease becomes a distant, faded memory. We believe that it is only fitting that the people who gave birth to world civilization and who are the primary victims of the barbarism that has established hegemony throughout the world will take responsibility for leading the struggle for liberation of the majority of the planet from the tyranny and despotism of US-led world imperialism. Brothers and sisters, the hour of Africa's redemption, which the great Marcus Garvey so prophetically envisioned many years ago, is upon us. We must build the African Socialist International and unite our dispersed, oppressed, and 1 billion strong African nation under the slogan, touch one, touch all. We must build the ASI under the leadership of the African workers aligned with the poor peasantry, for it is they who are the creators of social wealth and value. It is they who are the only social force capable of waging our liberation struggle to its victorious conclusion. African workers and peasants must assume the leadership of our society as a condition for our freedom. And I just want to say that the way the African workers and peasants do this, engage in leading the struggle for the liberation and unification of African people worldwide, is through its own revolutionary party. And for the first time in history, New York Times, the African working class has its own party, its own revolutionary party that has assumed the responsibility to destroy the African working class itself by becoming the new ruling class for Africa. That is the task that we've assumed. And we look at what we just went through with this manifesto. It clarifies, or it should, the understanding that we are not just fighting on one front. We're not just looking at Burkina Faso. We see the whole world and the world economy that we are confronted with today having its genesis in the attack on Africa, the creation of a whole world economy revolving around that. And when we say a world economy, we mean a world economy. We're not just talking about a relationship between white people and Black people. We're talking about a relationship that is enjoyed by everybody on the planet Earth, a relationship that has its origin in colonialism and has developed since that time. We are not talking about trying to create a multipolar world, which I know is an objective of some forces, and which offers some tactical significance in the sense that it does mean an assault on a unipolar world, that is, a world that's dominated primarily by the United States. We're talking about the ending of, we're talking about another unipolar world. And this being a world that is dominated by the previously colonized working people of the world. We're talking about the workers of the world actually becoming the new ruling class of the world. We're talking about the creation of a whole new world economy that is based on principles of socialism, or more than that, socialism after having achieved the elimination of class exploitation and oppression, and becoming this idealized thing that has been known as a classless society that has been talked about most recently as communism, but that was recognized as something that existed before even the advent of the entry Europe into modern history, and they called it primitive communism, which was something that was enjoyed by Africa and many peoples around the world. So I know I've said a lot, and there's so much stuff that I had wanted to introduce to this discussion, but I think I've exhausted the time frame that was allocated for me. Comrade Akile Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman. Well, this just makes it clear that we're going to have to do a part 2 to this study, because I think that all the presentations were absolutely necessary. And this is just a really important discussion. And, I'm hoping we can take some questions, but just really want to salute your leadership, over this whole process, but just for the understanding that we're able to come to today to be able to explain the world like this. And, it further gives, just makes you laugh at the bogus charges, being made against us, the Uhuru 3. It, makes it just absolutely laughable. Even the New York Times, writing this article asking, well, why is colonialism being talked about now? And making it seem as though this is just a popular term. And it's like you said, they just need to ask us. This is, how this discussion has reached this level because of the grinding, of the African liberation movement led by the African People's Socialist Party, that has created this situation where the primary contradiction is the thing that's being discussed, being forced. And, they will also, the New York Times will not acknowledge where it comes from, where this discussion, started, and who fought for colonialism to be recognized as the primary contradiction. They won't acknowledge that it was you, Chairman. They won't acknowledge African internationalism, but that's our responsibility to, bring this out into the world, to explain that these understandings were developed by the African working class and the party of the African working class. So again, really want to salute just the profound presentations that we've heard today. This is a very important discussion. We will have to do a part 2 to this. And we're going to go into announcements now, but to kick us off, I wanted to show this video. It is a Black People's March and Rally worldwide recap. This is what occurred on November 4th. And this is further evidence when we ask when the question is raised, well, why is colonialism being discussed? Well, we take a look at what the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations did for the first time in its Black People's March on the White House in 15 years, which is take the Black People's March and made it international with the co-sponsored this year by the Hands Off Uhuru Fight Back Coalition, with the theme and surrounding the campaign to drop the charges against the Uhuru 3. So we want to just take a look at this profound historic Black People's March and Rally that occurred on November 4th of this year.
Chair of the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations. The Black is Back Coalition was established something like 16 years ago. And the purpose of the Black is Back Coalition, in part, was to unite a movement for peace that incorporated the issues of Palestine, the issue of Africans who are catching hell throughout this country. We were tired of seeing a white left, so-called peace movement, so-called anti-war movement, walk across the corpse of Black people, ignore all the African political prisoners who were locked up, some just for 60 some odd years, some getting out just to die. They were able to walk all around that. For 15 years, we've been having this demonstration. For 15 years, we've tried to get the white left, the so-called peace movement, the so-called anti-war movement, to be able to unite with the struggle of African people right here against colonialism as we experience it right here. For 15 years, we've been telling them that they had to unite with the struggle of the Mexican people. You know that half of Mexico was stolen in 1848. They took half of Mexico, and then they declared the people coming across the border as illegals. They've done the same thing. This is the template that they used when they took on Palestine. They've used this all around the world. They've used it in this country. They used it everywhere. And settler colonialism requires
the attempt to destroy the people who are being colonized.
Uhuru. So again, that took place this year, November 4th, 2023, all around the world. You heard the cry to drop the charges against the Uhuru 3 and free Palestine. And continuing on with our announcements, again, in raising the question, why is colonialism being talked about? Because Chairman Omali has gone around the world to win this understanding of the colonial mode of production. And we want to continue the ability to bring the teachings and dynamic presentations and theory of African internationalism to the world. And you can help make that possible by donating today at paypal.me/OmaliTaughtMe. And I know we've had some contributions come in so far, so I will recognize those who have contributed. But again, recognizing this is a program, which is surrounded by the teachings and curriculum of African internationalism and the leadership of Chairman Omali Yeshitela. And you can support those efforts and bring that to an organization or campus near you by donating to paypal.me/OmaliTaughtMe. So now let's take a look at the movement announcements so you can see what's happening. Join the counteroffensive to stop the FBI attacks on the African People's Socialist Party and African liberation struggle. Drop the charges against the Uhuru 3, sign the petition, sign the emergency response pledge for immediate updates regarding the trial, and read the motion to dismiss, and stay tuned for upcoming events at handsoffuhuru.org. This campaign is also calling on you to bring your skills, your experience, and creativity to this fight back. Go to handsoffahuru.org/volunteer to see the list of committees and sign up to volunteer today. Build the anti-colonial free speech movement. And later today, from 2 to 4 p.m. Pacific time, the African National Women's Organization of San Diego hosts the second class of the Political Education and Self-Defense series. Join ANWO at Lindbergh Park for political education and finish the day throwing axes with Axe Throw Company. For more information, go to ANWO, that's ANWO, uhuru.org, and click on events. On Thursday, December 14th at 4 p.m. Pacific time at the First Street Federal Courthouse in Los Angeles, California. Come out to stop Zionist attacks on Raza educators, defend ethnic studies, and the liberated too. And later this month, on Wednesday, December 27th at 6:30 p.m. Central Time, the African People's Socialist Party, the African People's Solidarity Committee, presents Jews Against Colonialism, Build Solidarity with African, Palestinian, and Oppressed Peoples. The African People's Solidarity Committee is the organization of white people working under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party with the mandate to build the movement for white reparations to African people. Join this online event featuring, online and in person, so hybrid event featuring Chairman Omali Yeshitela, leader of the African People's Socialist Party, who calls on Jews and all white people to stand against the colonial domination of the Palestinian people by the US-backed settler state of Israel. To register, visit tinyurl.com/Jews Against Colonialism. And every Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central Africa time, tune in live for the Hands Off Uhuru, Hands Off Africa, Africa Region broadcast. The Africa Region of the African People's Socialist Party responds to the attacks on the Uhuru movement with a series of programs under the Hands Off Uhuru, Hands Off Africa campaign. Join Uhuru movement leaders Safari Mugeri, Morlai Conte, and Visto Sabisa, who are making the demand for the FBI and US government to back off and allow the African People's Socialist Party to advance the course of African people for self-determination. Watch and follow on Facebook at facebook.com/APSP Africa Region. Also on Thursdays, join the weekly studies hosted by the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement. Thursdays at 5 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Register at tinyurl.com/RNDP studies. The December issue of the Burning Spear newspaper is out. Digital subscribers, the December Spear is available to view in your account. Print subscribers, your issue has hit your mailbox or will be there shortly. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it today. Subscribe yourself, gift a subscription, or sponsor a subscription for a prisoner. Go to theburningspear.com/subscribe and go to theburningspear.store to become a regular distributor of the Burning Spear newspaper. Make sure you like and subscribe to The Burning Spear on TV to catch every episode of the Omali Taught Me Sunday Study. And once again, Uhuru Tours and Speakers Bureau is an institution of the African People's Socialist Party that coordinates events and tours for Chairman Omali Yeshitela and other party speakers and leaders. You can book Chairman Omali and other Uhuru Movement speakers for your campus or organization events coming in 2024 right now. Do not wait. Go to or email us at info@uhurutours.com or call 727-914-3621. And again, donate to Uhuru Tours by visiting paypal.me/Omali Taught Me. So that will conclude our events. For more information about upcoming events for the Uhuru movement, you can visit our calendar at theburningspear.com/events. So thank you, comrades, for your patience as we go through those announcements. And we will likely only be able to take one question on today, extend the study just a little bit on today, and want to make sure that we can get some closing remarks from both of our panelists today, Secretary General Luwezi Kinshasa of the African Socialist International and Chairman Omali Yeshitela. Want to shout out Comrade Arthur, who made a $20 donation to Uhuru Tours today. Thank you so much for your contribution, Comrade. And also want to acknowledge where people are tuning in from. We have checked in with us today: St. Louis, Missouri; San Diego, California; Philadelphia, Pennsylvania; Cincinnati, Ohio; Oakland, California; Minneapolis, Minnesota; St. Petersburg, Florida; Baton Rouge, Louisiana; London, England; Fresno, California; Chesapeake, Virginia; Silver Spring, Maryland; Tampa, Florida; Haiti; Chicago, Illinois; Fort Myers, Florida; Gainesville, Florida; Lexington, Kentucky; and occupied Azania or South Africa, all tuned in with us this morning. So thank you all, comrades, for being here with us. And let me go to our questions and see which one we can take today. And let's see. Well, there is a question from Comrade Arthur. It's kind of, I guess I'll ask these as there were two separate questions, but they are connected together. And we'll make this the question that we asked today before going into closing remarks. Comrade Arthur asks, is the anti-French actions from the people of Mali and other West African states, is this pro-African unity or Islamic jihadist? Religion has a powerful effect on individuals' thoughts and actions. And how does fundamental Islamist or jihadist affect African internationalism? So That's the question we'll take, and please feel free, Comrade S.G. Luwezi, to respond, and Chairman as well. Yeah, all right, so we'll pass it over, Huru.
Yes, sure. Thank you for the question. Basically, to begin with, the struggle against French colonialism is a foundation upon which any unity can be built. The masses, they start from their own experience. As we said earlier on, the experience of Africans in Mali, Burkina Faso, Cote d'Ivoire, and everywhere throughout Africa is the same, is that they come to conclusion they cannot develop because of French control, French domination. And what is not clear everywhere is the distinction that the people do make. They think they are worse off because they are under French domination. And they think if they were under any other domination, things would be better. And you hear things like, well, Nigeria is developing, Ghana is developing, Anglophone Africa is developing, which is not true. You know, what's we characterize as developments is like you're having some roads being built somewhere, some buildings being built somewhere, and things like that. But the reality is that colonialism as a mode of production must go. The people have not yet come to that conclusion. They have come to the conclusion that French colonialism is the problem. They have not analyzed the world as a whole to say, wow, how comes China is powerful? How comes Russia is powerful? Why the US is powerful? They have not analyzed where the US gets its wealth from, why the United States is powerful. They have not done a critical study of the whole thing. They just know United States is more powerful than France. They just know China is developing faster. They just know Russia has won against the United States in Syria and other places. So, you know, things are disconnected. And what African internationalism has the benefit to do is to bring everything together. So you can analyze French colonialism at the same time you're analyzing United States, history of colonialism, Britain, Japan, everything. And this way you can come to the conclusion that you are opposed to colonialism as a mode of production as a general principle. It's not just as a one-off, as a general principle. And also, as we said, the struggles are not led by the African working class. So if you hear, like now, if you come to London, you will hear, if you go to slogans, if you go to demonstration in London, you will hear people saying touch one, touch all. Even there might not be a single member of the Huru movement there. Why? Because the influence of African internationalism in London. So the same way, the masses of African people in Mali and other places, they have not come under full influence of African internationalism. So they see the world from the lenses of a sector of the African people bourgeoisie, which sees their own interests can't be forward by the French colonialism anymore. So the masses are, you know, developing that kind of patriotism following the African people bourgeoisie. But in the same time, the unification of Africa can only come about as a victory of the African working class over the entire African nation. That's how the African unity can come about, because the Africa must win against world colonialism, which means that the foundation, the pedestal of colonial capitalism must be overthrown. And the unification of Africa, as we said all along, the African People's Socialist Party is carrying the legacy of Marcus Garvey, is carrying the legacy of Kwame Nkrumah. So we are articulating that in a way that probably people want to hear the masses of Africa everywhere articulating. So if you want to facilitate that, of course, we invite you to join us, to be on board, so that everywhere throughout Africa, the articulation of African unity becomes coherent, which means people are uniting with African internationalism. That's the struggle. It's ongoing. You know, we're winning every day, but that's an ongoing struggle. You know, and I can't say in the Mali they're articulating African internationalism, but we can say in the Mali there are people who are listening to African internationalism. We can say that. So this is ongoing struggle. And also, I haven't seen in Mali or Niger, people articulating that they're fighting France in the name of Islam. I have not really come across that. What makes it probably difficult in a place like Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, 90%, if not more, of African people there are Muslim, following Islam. And as you know, one of the key factor that has definitely exposed French capitalism in those places is basically one, the rise of army officers, a sector of the army officers. And as you know, those army officers, they have not said they're doing it because of Islam. If you go to Burkina Faso, for example, Ibrahim Traoré, the president, is doing as much as he can for people to identify him with Thomas Sankara. You don't hear Ibrahim Traoré and his leadership, saying they're doing in the name of Islam. Over 90% or more in those places that practice Islam. So I think they're really trying to be as much as they could to be seen as a follower of Thomas Sankara. And I think it's the same thing also to a certain extent to Mali, because it's Mali, the leader that came in Mali in the 60s that was close to Nkrumah, close to the moment, is Modibo Keïta. And people also trying to present the government as those who are continuing the work of Modibo Keïta. And in Niger, I'm not that clear much in terms of what is the organization or the leadership that came before they identified the most with. But I have not seen anywhere any of these three leadership, saying that they're doing this work because of Islam or anything like that. So yeah, that's what I can say. I'm sure German is going to intervene in that. Yes, well,
thank you, Comrade Secretary General Luwezi. I think that's really important observation to make. Can you direct Akila? What's the name of the person who raised that? Was it Matthew?
Arthur.
Arthur. And what exactly was the comment's question? Is what's happening in the Sahel? Is that was it pro-African or was it pro?
Islamic jihadists,
jihad.
recognizing that religion has a powerful effect on individuals' thoughts and actions. This is the comment.
Well, first of all, let me just say that being pro-Africa does not prohibit them from being pro-jihadists. I want to say that everything that we're experiencing in terms of resistance is against colonialism. And even the jihadists, as they are characterized, are fighting against, and I'm not even suggesting, as Comrade Secretary Luwezi helped us to understand, that there's any motivation here by Islam and what we see happening in Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, or any other place there. But a point I would make is that even like in the United States, there was a time where people became Muslims, and I would help people understand that Africans introduced Islam to the United States, primarily more than anybody else. But it was something that came about as an expression of anti-colonialism. It was do for self. It was against the white man who was the devil. It was an explanation that was offered to fight against the white power that represented itself essentially contemporarily here and throughout Africa, even as under the guise of Christianity. Christianity became, as you know, like a civilizing tool, mission of the colonizers. It became a means by which an assault was made on the belief system of African people. That's where you saw, if you look at much of Africa and even some of the places we're talking about, the Sahel now, you're looking at struggles that had to be made against the Catholic Church, against other expressions of Christianity. So sometimes people fighting against oppression and exploitation doesn't mean that they are conscious of the origin of the oppression, doesn't mean that they understand where this oppression comes from. That's the role of the advanced detachment. That's the role of revolutionaries, to go into those places, to identify forces who can be brought into the revolutionary project, who can function in Niger, Mali, and all these other places, carrying revolutionary science, so that people will not be led to what Common Author talked about, the religion, problem of religion, taking people to these different places. And another thing I would say about that, just the comment that whether or not they're jihadists, because religion does these horrible things, jihadists as opposed to what? As opposed to Christians? Jihadists as opposed to what? If religion does this thing, but we use the example of bad things that religion do when we raise up the question of jihadists in Islam and Muslims, etc. So I just think we have to be careful in understanding that. And we are scientists ourselves. So for us, the question is not whether they're Muslims or whether they're Christians or any other, or what is characterized as animist, or, I mean, I've seen that whole argument too, like we have to adopt voodoo, like what happened in Haiti, because that's the basis of victory. Religion is not going to free us. What's going to free us is like having a scientific assessment of this contradiction and making a struggle to deal with that. Certainly that's what people, I would hope, in this study, in this discussion, would understand. I hope that part of what we're doing with this discussion is arming people ideologically, so that we can advance the struggle of our people and not get caught up in fighting some expression of resistance, as people may be experiencing it and identifying it based on their understanding. I mean, I thought that the movie, they cloned Tyrone, I thought it was a progressive movie because it identified the U.S. as the enemy. It identified this subterranean force that's responsible for the oppression and exploitation of African people. But it's extremely misdirecting because there are material forces that they don't have to clone, which, by the way, is something that was borrowed from the original Nation of Islam in some ways, with Yaqub, the big-head scientist who sort of created the white man through this process of genetic engineering, which is what Tyrone, the whole, they cloned Tyrone. But it was interesting and progressive because it identified that bad things are happening to African people, that there's work that's being done by the oppressors to keep dope pushers and dope in our community, and to keep pimps and exploiters of African women, in the streets in order to control the rest of us. So I thought that was pretty important. But the answer to that is not to be looking for some damn underground factory where they're making clones, but it's a revolutionary scientific approach. That's what we have to do. That's what our responsibility is. And that's true when we look at Mali, Burkina Faso, and the other things that we're talking about. Ultimately, that's why we're doing this study right now, so people don't have to be following a trajectory that's not based on science and a real understanding of the contradictions that we're dealing with. I also want to say that some people, they look at the thing about the Army officers, and generally speaking, you're not in a good place. There's an Army officer who heads Egypt right now. His name is Al-Sisi, and he took over the people's struggle. The people were engaged in serious kinds of struggle. And the Egyptian police was used as the force that was killing people and trying to protect the system. And so, and because the police were doing this, the people actually championed the idea of the army stepping in to protect the people. And of course, that's because the people didn't recognize, or many of them didn't, because it was a middle class, leading this whole uprising and what have you. But that the state is the state, and the police and the army are instruments of colonial state power. And that's generally true. What happened with France employing a sector of the African petty bourgeoisie to control these entities that they call countries, that they've split up and called countries. And what was happening, of course, is that young officers overthrew that, got rid of that. Where that goes, and how were they able to do that? They were doing that because the masses were pushing it, just like in Egypt. Remember, it was masses who demanded changes in Egypt that brought El-Sisi to power, that's crushing the life of the people in Egypt, and also preventing Palestinians from being able to get into Egypt or to get resources coming into Palestine through that way because of cooperation with the Israeli state. So that's the military who took advantage of the struggle of the masses. How can the military do this? The military, you see mosques and churches and religions able to lead struggle based on the aspiration of the masses, the demonstrated aspiration of the masses, or the threat of mass uprising and what have you, because they're the only sector that has the kind of organization and freedom to do that. Because you can meet in the mosque, and the military bases, people can meet and have these discussions and plot and stuff like that. That's not generally true because the military works to keep the rest of the people down, generally speaking. So this has been ostensibly overturned in Mali and Niger and other places. Now, does this contribute to unity? It can, because the Niger, Mali, Guinea, not Guinea-Bissau, but Burkina Faso have, and perhaps some other entity, some other country there, as it's characterized, come into an agreement now, a unified kind of agreement about working together, and as Comrade Secretary General Luwezi mentioned, in Burkina Faso, an effort is being made to carry out the kinds of programs, or at least express an interest in carrying out the kinds of programs and liberation of the masses of the people that we saw exemplified by Thomas Sankara. And Sankara, by the way, also had armed the people, the masses of people in Burkina Faso, and had created community kinds of self-defense committees similar to what had happened in Cuba, and so the potential is there, but the missing element, generally speaking, is a revolutionary party that's providing the kind of leadership, and that's what the task is now. And that's the call that's being made to Africans everywhere, and to Africans who are in these places, to step forward and represent the interests of the advanced interests of the African. We use the term working class, but we mean the producers. We mean the people who produce the wealth in society, etc. That's what's going to take, and we have to have our own revolutionary organization guided by revolutionary science to be able to take that on. Uhuru. I know it's a long response, Comrade Arthur, but best I can do is within the time frame we've got to work with.
Uhuru Chairman Eshi Luwezi, and to Comrade Arthur, thank you for your question. And that was a call by the chairman to join the African People's Socialist Party. Like Chairman says, we're not just here to discuss these ideas, but for us to get into motion and become a member of the African People's Socialist Party. And you can do so by going to apspuhuru.org and go ahead and filling out that join form. And we do have to go ahead and begin to wrap up, but I just but based off of the feedback and the discussion that's hitting the chat section right now, Chairman, again, I do think we have to visit this as another study to complement this one that allows us to continue to further deepen things that we've discussed now. I want to also acknowledge Comrade Jainaba, who contributed today, as well as Comrade Lewis made a contribution and a comment that says the chairman and the African People's Socialist Party is surely worthy and capable of leading Africa and the diaspora to Uhuru. So Uhuru, Comrade Lewis. So with that being said, we will go ahead and into our closing remarks before closing the study on today. We'll start with you, Secretary General Luwezi Kinshasa, and then close out with Chairman Omali. Uhuru.
Yes, well, thank you so much for having in this program. It's an incredible program, and salute Chairman Omali for brilliant leadership, leading the entire African nation, the entire world in this new era of struggle. And comrades, I shared 52 times. So I ask everybody in concluding, share, meet your goal of 50. And our job is really lay out for people to join, to unite with African internationalism. And is the best way to participate, to rush in, to forward the struggle, to complete basically the struggle of the Garvey, of the Lumumba, of Malcolm X, all the giants that came before us. It's really upon us to complete that struggle. We can't do it without having our own African People's Socialist Party wherever you are located. That's our best contribution at this present time. So I just thank you for this program, and I look forward to the next one.
Thank you, Comrade Director. First of all, I just want to remind everybody that we started this study not just as a project to advance discussion. We started this discussion as a project of the African People's Socialist Party to create cadre, to develop a capacity for the African People's Socialist Party to really project the revolutionary project throughout the world, initially, within the party itself. That's how this started. So it wasn't just to be a talk fest. It was to arm the party, to make it more capable of making the revolution. I think that's one thing I wanted to say. And another thing I think is really important to recognize in closing this is that we're engaged in a revolutionary project, and revolution is not an event, you see. It is, in fact, a process. And we have, this is a part of the process that we're talking about. Some people see stuff happening in a particular place in the world, and they want us to imitate that right away. Just go ahead and just make this thing happen. And we've had that demand being made sometimes by people who've come into the party and they've left the party because they were dissatisfied, because we just go ahead and make the revolution, et cetera. And but the fact is that it's a process, and it's a process that relies on science, a scientific understanding of the world. It relies on advanced revolutionary theory. It relies on organization. It relies on the development of cadre. It relies on tactics and strategies that we have to carry out. And if we don't have revolutionary patience to develop this, then we will not be a part of a revolutionary organization. And that's all right, because everybody cannot do this. What we're talking about now is the advanced detachment. And we want to impact and be involved every place we can in the world. But we need cadre for the party. And there are people who love us, and I appreciate that, but they recognize they cannot be cadre. Some of them have told us that I really want to join. I love the party, support the party, but I cannot be cadre. And they're going to do other kinds of things to work with us, and that's all right. But it's important for us to understand this. This is not a talk fest. We're not involved in this discussion just to get as many likes as we can. We want people to hear it. We want people to see it so that they can be more competent and informed about what to do and how to get there, and also so that they can recognize their party, whether they can join it or not. They can recognize their party. They can recognize the ability to support the project for our liberation, which is extremely important for us to be able to do. So those are some of the things I wanted to say. And then finally, I think it's really important for members of this study, people, participants in this study, to recognize that the African People's Socialist Party has come under assault because the New York Times has to write about where this colonial question has come from. Because we have led the struggle, because we have taken it from this place of superstition and hopes and dreams, et cetera, as opposed to giving it like science and direction and organization. And we've seen what the colonizer has done in every instance where we've seen the emergence of a force competent, capable providing that kind of leadership. We've seen assassinations, mass incarceration. That's what we're talking about. Palestine, we're talking about France now, demanding the right to continue to suck the blood of African people in the Sahel. And we know that France couldn't stand alone. There's nowhere in hell that France could do this without support of its international colonial partners any more than this fallacious entity, this white nationalist entity in Palestine could stand alone if it didn't have the support from the colonial powers of the world. And the fact is that we see this attack that's being made on the leadership of the African Revolution. That's what July 29, 2022 was all about, when they came with tanks and they came with military armament and all kinds of military forces. They said they came there because they wanted to carry out a court proceeding. What a ridiculous, thing that they've said. And then the fact is that even as I'm having this discussion, I am under arrest of sorts, in the same way that somebody's on probation is under arrest. My movements being restricted so that we can have this discussion to a much larger audience. That's their intent. But, Comrade Luwezi has said, share 50 times, carry out your responsibility to advance this as well. And the other thing that you must do, you must participate in the hands-off Uhuru. You must participate in the struggle that we're engaged in now to create the anti-colonial free speech movement. You must, wherever you are, demand hands off Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the Uhuru 3. You must do this using every space that's available to you to make it happen. And in so doing, what our responsibility is to expose the hypocrisy of the United States that postures around the world, as this advocate and defender of democracy against all kinds of autocracies and autocrats. We will show, you have the responsibility to show that's garbage, nonsense, and that is Africa that's under assault. And what we're looking at, and whether it is in Palestine, occupied Palestine, whether it is in Mali, Niger, or Burkina Faso, whether it is in St. Louis, Missouri, it's white power that's attacking the rest of us. And trying to maintain its status and stature at the expense of everybody else. We must be free. We have to make this struggle. And I want to express appreciation to you, Comrade Akile. I know that I've sort of taken advantage of the time frame that I was supposed to have in terms of summing up, but those are things that I wanted to say, and I think is really important. We have to advance this struggle. We have to win. We are winning. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman, we are winning. Uhuru, comrades, and again, just salute the profound leadership of Chairman Omali Yeshitela, and as well as the participation of Secretary General Luwezi Kinshasa. And I want to thank the entire Omali Taught Me show team for helping with this production, and to all of you for tuning in today and staying with us longer as we go into these very important and critical questions. And whether you are watching on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, or Twitter, we're glad to have you on with us. Thank you for participating and fighting back against the censorship and trying to silence Chairman Omali Yeshitela and anti-colonial free speech. Make sure to follow the chairman on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Twitch, and Instagram, and subscribe to the Burning Spirit TV on YouTube to catch every episode of the Omali Taught Me Sunday Study. Hands off Uhuru, hands off Africa.
Africa.
And drop the charges now. Uhuru.
Uhuru.